here we have three important guests, which are Judith Sunderland, Arencibia, and Eleni Takou, which are very important because they focus basically on the rights of migrants, and not only. In this case, we wanted to focus specifically on Europe, and in particular on Greece and Spain, because as you may know, when we talk about migration, Greece and Spain are one of the most discussed countries in the European Union because of the situation that is going on there, especially when we deal with migrants, when we deal with the so-called pushbacks, when we deal with so-called detention center for migrants. And we have noticed that the European Union member states have been adopted very securitarian policies that criminalize migrants. And this is the main point of this entire discussion, because we want to discuss not only whether it is easy or not for the civil society and organization to enter within the so-called detention center for migrants, and also the living condition of the migrants within these centers, and if there are alternatives to this. So this will be the main focus of this discussion. And I want to give the floor to the director of CHIL, which is Andrea Malaparte, that will actually also give more explanation of why we wanted to create this webinar and why it is very important for us, the topic of concerning detention center for migrants, and why we wanted to launch this site. The floor is yours, Andrea, if you want to say something.
Thank you, Oida, and thank you again to the speakers and all the participants. And it's kind of encouraging that we have so many people talking about this issue, which is so important, but also with very few opportunity to talk about it. It seems like in Europe, well, not only in Europe, is taken for granted immigration detention as it is. And I'm sure there are many black holes in every country that we want to talk to. We decided to focus on Italy, Spain, and Greece, because of course we are all part of this European migration policy that's detain people, sometimes without charge, and in many times in such unbearable condition. But I don't want to go into the details. I just want to let you know how important it is for a coalition like the Italian Coalition for Civil Liberties and Rights to work on this issue. So we started working on the migration detention a while ago. We are being a network. We have many organizations on the ground working to monitor the situation in the detention centers. With this website and with the reports, we wanted to make sure that this work would be amplified and strengthened, given how important it is. It's not just a one-off website, it's an ongoing process, including building an observatory of immigration detention in Italy, but also is part of a wider strategy to change the framework on immigration detention overall, stop this practice, and also introduce alternatives. So we are focused as much as on monitoring and also on try to make the case for alternative to detention. Specifically, we are running a project which is a pilot of 40 cases on alternative to detention, experimenting in Italy the idea of case management on individual level to make sure that people, even when they might be removed from the country, this is done without breaching their human rights. But hopefully what we see in this project, I mean, we can talk about later, most of the time, whenever you apply a case management approach at individual level, you can find a legal pathway for this kind of people to stay in the country. So this means that access to information and access to a lawyer and access to justice is so important. And it's one of the rights that has been violated the most. And we built evidence with the report and now with the website that when it comes to access to a lawyer and access to information, Italy lags behind many international standards. Or, of course, there are other important issues like judiciary issue and the non-professional judges during all the process. and also access to health is another priority. Just in the last 3 months, we have 3 people dying within detention centers or after being released from detention center and moving to hospitals. So that's why this is urgent and necessary to work more on this. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Oisa and the speakers, and maybe we can have a Q&A later and discuss it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea, for your introduction. And I will briefly introduce our guests. So we have Judith Sunderland, which is Associate Director for Human Rights Watch, and she has covered a wide range of human rights issues. And she has a particular expertise on migration and asylum policies, as well as discrimination and intolerance. Then we will have Eleni Takou, who is a part of Human Rights 360, and she's a co-founder, deputy director, and policy, and she works for a policy and advocacy and communication. And we will have also Daniel Arencibia, which is very important. He's a lawyer that works with migrants for the protection of migrants' rights in the Canary Islands. So without further ado, I will leave the floor to Judith. And thank you again for participating in our webinar. And we are looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me. While I always like to be promoted, I do have to clarify that I am Associate Director for Europe for Human Rights Watch. I'm not the Associate Director of the entire organization.
Sorry.
Would that I were. I will try to stick to 10 to 15 minutes, but Oisa, please call on me if I go on for too long. I wanted to first thank everybody for being here. It's great to see such interest in this really important topic. I want to give a general overview of the issues with respect to detention of people on the basis of their immigration status. And then talk a bit about our approach, the approach that Human Rights Watch takes, and then I'll just give a few examples, actually from around the world, not just Europe, I hope that's okay, of the work that we have done on this issue. Just to start off to saying that international law, actually, as well as EU regional law, allows for immigration detention. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights prohibits arbitrary detention, but allows for detention on the basis of immigration status and for the purposes of detention. The Human Rights Committee, which oversees respect for the ICCPR, the covenant, has said that immigration detention is not arbitrary per se, but it has to be provided for by law. It has to be necessary to achieve a legitimate purpose, and it has to be proportionate to that purpose, right? And when we talk about the detention being provided for by law, there we're really talking about, it literally has to be written, prescribed in law, but it also has to be accompanied by a number of safeguards, like an individual assessment, judicial oversight, the ability to contest detention, and as well as other safeguards. And that's why, for example, the automatic detention of a particular group of migrants, say migrants arriving by sea, as we've seen in a number of jurisdictions like Malta, Australia, and elsewhere, that kind of and Spain actually, automatic detention would be considered arbitrary because it doesn't allow for an individual assessment. It has to be necessary, right? What does that mean? Well, it's only necessary really if it's for the purposes of deportation and if there's a flight risk. And even so, it has to be for the shortest amount of time possible, during which time the authorities detaining a person have to show due diligence in trying to deport the person, right? If they don't show that they're taking steps to deport the person or take them to the next step in their procedure, then that detention after a while becomes arbitrary, and therefore unlawful. Yeah. Also, if there is no prospect, if the person doesn't represent a flight risk, right? Or if indeed there are alternative, less coercive measures that could be implemented to encourage cooperation with the ongoing procedures, then the state shouldn't detain. And this is something that I think we'll get into more and more in the course of this webinar. I'll return to it at the end. And of course, detention has to be proportionate. It's an incredible intrusion on a person's right to liberty. Obviously, it's deprivation of liberty. And in the vast majority of cases, our view is that detention for immigration-related purposes is neither necessary nor proportionate to the goal of enforcing immigration laws, particularly because we can see that there are reasonable alternatives that are less coercive, less intrusive, more humane, and rights respecting. So for that reason, we strongly, sorry, I'm dealing with a cat trying to attack me here. We are in favor of the gradual abolishment of immigration detention everywhere in the world. That is something that, for example, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has called for. And that is, in fact, embedded in the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, which is this set of non-binding principles and objectives that most countries in the world, unfortunately not Italy, adopted at the end of 2018. It has, one of its objectives is use immigration detention only as a measure of last resort and work towards alternatives. And on that note, I just wanted to mention that the United Nations just published the Secretary General's report, first report on implementation or respect, let's say, compliance with the compact in advance of a major summit that will take place around it in May in New York. And in that report, the Secretary General notes that in the pandemic, we did see a number of countries around the world, and definitely in Europe, releasing detainees from immigration detention facilities, you know, to alleviate overcrowding. In some cases, entire centers were completely emptied out. That is definitely the case in Spain, for example. It didn't last. I mean, they're now filling back up again, but for a while there, everyone was released. But at the same time, terrible practices around detention persisted around the world, and some states certainly used public health grounds to justify longer, worse detention and unlawful deportations. Of course, even if detention could be considered lawful in certain situations, the conditions in which people are detained can render that detention unlawful, of course, right? Yeah, as well as inhumane and terrible for the people involved. Around the world and in European countries, we see people detained, again, solely because they entered unlawfully, because the state wishes to deport them. They're being held in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. You have children being held with unrelated adults. These are facilities in which, in many places, there is minimal or non-existent mental and physical health care. And of course, in many places, there is a high risk of sexual and other violence against both women and men. I just wanted to say a few words about children. There is, of course, the Convention on the Rights of the Child that talks in the same terms of using detention as a last resort and for the shortest amount of time when it comes to children. But the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which oversees compliance with the convention, has said that detention, I'm quoting, detention cannot be justified, detention of children, yeah, cannot be justified solely on the basis of the child being unaccompanied or separated, or on their migratory or resident status or lack thereof. So basically, the general consensus is that the best interest of the child is clearly indicates that children should not be detained, and they shouldn't be detained even alongside their families. You know? So if they are detained in very exceptional situations, they should have the right in detention to education, to recreation, and for their basic necessities to be met. And of course, we see, sadly, around the world that children in detention are denied systematically their rights, above all, of course, their right to liberty and actual childhood. So just to sum up, Human Rights Watch takes the view that detaining people solely because of their immigration status or for the purposes of a deportation, regardless of whether that deportation could be pursued lawfully and carried out in a way that is safe for the person and respects their rights, that detention is deeply harmful, it's expensive, and it's ineffective as a deterrent, which is often one of the arguments, right, that is used to justify immigration detention. And there are also people who would argue that it's a proper punitive measure, which is, of course, an opinion we do not share and is not upheld by international law. So, our view is that immigration detention should be gradually abolished because it's, rarely, if ever, necessary or proportionate. We understand that might be a gradual process, but there are people, many people, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably around the world, who are currently in what we would consider arbitrary immigration-related detention, and those people should be released immediately. And here I can mention a few categories of people: children, families with children, people with psychosocial disabilities, people detained solely due to unlawful entry or re-entry with no prospect of deportation, people detained in conditions that are inhuman and degrading. All of those people should be detained, should be released, immediately, tomorrow, today. And governments should be pursuing non-custodial alternatives to detention. And I'll get back to this at the end of my talk. Let me just check how long I've been speaking so far. I'm running out of time. I'm going to do a whirlwind tour of some work that Human Rights Watch has done. And I'll start with something that I was deeply involved in, which is documenting the horrific conditions and treatment in detention centers in Libya. In July 2018, I went with a colleague who's an expert on Libya to that country, and we were able to visit 4 detention centers, two in Tripoli, one in Misrata and one in Suara, where we were able to speak with detainees. We were able to wander around on our own. We were closely watched. We were monitored. We did our best to surround ourselves by large groups of people, which actually wasn't hard to arrange. Everybody wanted to talk to us, but in a way so that we could limit the view that guards had of exactly who we were talking to, and we made sure that we were out of earshot so they could not hear what people were telling us. In some instances, we were unable to ensure that measure of privacy, and we just had to do sort of triply verify with the people who were talking to us that they were aware that they could be facing the risk of retaliation for talking to us. It's always a very difficult thing to do, interviews like that in very risky conditions for the people, but we did manage. And as far as we know, there were no retaliations. And we did set up a system to try to keep in touch with people so that they could reach out to us if anything happened. And of course, while there in these centers, we documented inhumane conditions that included severe overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, poor food quality, lack of food, lack of water, malnutrition, lack of adequate health care, even though some NGOs try to provide some health care. horrifying accounts of violence by guards, including beatings, whippings, and the use of electric shocks. We saw many children in these detention centers, and as you might imagine, they are subjected to the same kind of conditions and treatment as adults, and they certainly have no access to education or recreation or adequate nutrition or healthcare. This detention in Libya is indefinite. It's not subject to judicial review. It is completely arbitrary under international law. Obviously, one of the major advocacy goals of Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and so many Italian organizations and so many regional European organizations working on these issues is to see the release of everyone currently arbitrarily detained, all migrants and refugees and asylum seekers currently arbitrarily detained in Libya, and related steps that EU countries and institutions should be doing with respect to their collaboration with Libyan authorities. But I will happily take questions about that, but I'm going to quickly just mention a few other bits of work. Last year I should just say on the basis of that research, we published a report in January 2019 called No Escape from Hell, which is also the name of a more recent documentary by an Italian journalist named Sara Creta, which I highly recommend. Last year, we published a report that we did jointly with Amnesty International on immigration detention in Canada, and specifically on the impact on mental health of immigration detention in that country, where there is in fact no legal limit to immigration detention, so it's indefinite, as it can be in Libya. And that research found, unsurprisingly, that this detention has a devastating impact on mental health. Not knowing how long people will be detained, causes trauma, distress, a sense of powerlessness. A detention of this nature can exacerbate existing psychosocial disabilities and of course trigger new ones, including depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. So we, for that research, they didn't go into detention centers. They interviewed something around 90 former detainees and guards and officials and policymakers and associations working to provide care for immigration detainees. That research found also that immigration detainees who are from communities of color, so particularly detainees who are Black, as well as people with psychosocial disabilities, were more likely to be detained in the worst facilities, which in the Canadian context are provincial jails, basically, which are not meant to be, they're not designed to be immigration detention facilities, but are nonetheless used for that purpose. And the worse conditions, worse services, etc. So the research also uncovered what we determined was systemic racism in the implementation of Canada's immigration detention policy. Very quickly on Greece, I know Eleni is going to talk, give a far more in-depth perspective on detention in Greece. I just wanted to mention quickly that we worked for a number of years, and I continue to work to a certain extent on the issue of unaccompanied children being detained in what was allowed for in Greek law and called quote unquote protective custody. This was when the authorities find that there weren't enough spaces in dedicated shelters for unaccompanied migrant children. And so they would put them basically in police station jail cells until they could find a place in a shelter. Here too, we conducted interviews over the years in a number of different sites, usually without being able to go inside the jail cells, but we were able to get descriptions from the children about what they were facing. And you know, children described just really horrible conditions, overcrowded cells, being held with unrelated adults, being scared, a lack of access to information or services, not talking to anybody besides police officers for weeks on end. A really horrific situation. In the midst of the pandemic last year in May 2020, sorry, not last year, the year before, in May 2020, there were 276 children behind bars in these kinds of conditions in Greece. We, alongside others, have been advocating for a change to that practice for a long time. And thankfully, at the end of 2020, the government did announce an end to that policy. And in December, Parliament revoked the law that allowed for it. And we have seen some other practical improvements, like an increase in the number of places for older accompanied children to live independently in apartments that are managed by non-governmental organizations. But there do appear to be children still who are, the practice appears to continue. As of August last year, which is the last time the government published statistics, there were, I think, 21 children in jail cells in what they were still calling protective custody. So it's a continuing problem that we have to continue to work on. And of course, and I'm sure Eleni will talk about this, unaccompanied children and families and children with their families continue to be detained on centers on the Aegean Islands and in the mainland. Finally, if I have, do I have 2 minutes? Not really.
Yeah, that's one minute, one minute and a half.
All right, 1 minute. We published last year a big report that colleagues of mine were involved in on alternatives to detention, precisely in order to add to the volume of evidence out there that alternatives to detention do exist. They work. They are far more humane and rights respecting, and they also, you know, help to achieve the goals that authorities have in these situations, right? But in a way that is far more humane. And the best kind of alternative are what Andrea mentioned at the top of this conversation, these community-based case management programs that provide a holistic set of services that include, you know, things like legal aid, guidance on securing basic necessities like housing and employment. These programs, they're very effective. They ensure engagement of individuals at very high rates, engagement with their procedures. People don't abscond, they don't disappear, they stay, they benefit. And many of them do, in fact, then find a way, a lawful and appropriate way to remain in the country and contribute. And others will be deported, but they will be deported in a way that respects their rights. So I will leave it there. And thank you for allowing me to go on a bit too long.
Thank you so much, Judith, for your insight. It was very interesting. And yeah, of course, we need to face the reality that, of course, the main aim here is to overcome this system and to come to an abolition, I would say, of these centers and find alternatives instead of detention and systematically detaining people. And again, we also detain children. That is one of the main problems, people with vulnerability. So we must overcome the system. I will leave the floor to Eleni Takou, which will give us an insight on Greece in particular, which is a very particular situation and situation where there are many violations of human rights as well, pushbacks. We've listened so many times about Greece and what is going on over there. And Eleni, please give us more information on what is going on. Thank you.
Hi, Oisa. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me over. I will try to give an overview of what's happening in Greece, just saying that, as I told Oisa, because of also the weather, some storms in Greece. I don't know if you have heard the news. I will have to leave in about 40 minutes, so I will not be here for the Q&A. I'm really sorry about that from beforehand. So I tried to put my notes on a PowerPoint just to be a bit more productive. I don't know if you can see it. Do you? Okay, great. So yes. So I'll try to give you an overview of what's happening in Greece in terms of administrative detention and relevant issues. When we say relevant issues, we mostly mean, you know, the lack of documentation and the access documentation and all the problems that this entail. As regards the operational framework, what we have been seeing, as I'm sure more of you are aware of it, is that the migrant and refugee population in Greece has faced several challenges in gaining a solid legal status. And there have been some constitutive legislative amendments that are based generally on the imposition of administrative detention without discrimination, as Judith said, which is the main issue. And in what, you know, the state thinks that could be used as a deterrence policy in the country. So in this period, the population lives in precarious conditions. A lot of people are being detained in detention centers, pre-removal centers, and as we call them in the Greek framework, but also in police stations for many months, more than 6 sometimes, in totally inappropriate condition and without access to basic rights. So a bit of a context on the framework. One is the developments of protective custody, as Judith said. This is starting with the good news, let's say, which is the only good news actually in Greece, so that we have seen some developments in this regard. This practice of protective custody, which was essentially detention for unaccompanied minors when shelter places were not available. So the authorities called it protective custody because actually they would be placed somewhere else, but they're placed in detention because no shelters are available. In essence, it was detention. So we have seen some good developments there. So the accommodation places have augmented. I have put a chart of the latest infographics of the formal situation update. As you see, the detention clause is not that present. However, there are several challenges remaining in the cracks of the system, let's say. So firstly, once you see on the right side of the chart, you see the analysis per accommodation type. So once you see reception and identification center, that actually means detention for identification. So it's not that detention is over. Also, there are several challenges remaining when it comes to the access to asylum, or what happens to minors after a potential rejection of their asylum claim. So there are several issues remaining there. And we have been seeing detention of minors in several instances also in removal centers and in police stations. So things have become a bit better in this front, in the protective custody front, but not as good as they should. On the other issues, so there is all the other developments have been quite bad, quite negative in Greece. Once the legislative amendment of last year of 2 years ago now, it's 2022 now. So 2020, the legislation on asylum changed, and one of the main things that were repealed was the clause under which administrative detention was an exceptional measure. So it kind of reversed in the legislation itself, saying that administrative detention in view of return is now the rule, and alternatives are applied only on an exceptional basis and under specific conditions. So this fundamentally changes let's say the burden of the system from a human rights center system to a detention oriented system. 2 other quite significant legislative changes were not directly in the asylum legislation, but in the migration legislation, because we know that these things are linked. The one is the abolition of the humanitarian close residence permit, which actually essentially meant that until 2020, people that were rejected as asylum seekers could apply for a residence permit on humanitarian grounds, which was a very important laws, because there were many vulnerable cases that were not eligible for asylum on the one hand, but on the other hand could apply for a humanitarian residence permit, because we are talking now for, single mothers, unaccompanied minors, or any kind of people with health problems. So this clause has also been abolished with the legislative amendment. And at the same time, there are no provisions that temporarily suspend the return of third country nationals, which was also a clause that was used in Greece. It was not always used in a good sense, in the sense that people under a deportation order could get a 6-month suspension of their return if they were employed in several sectors of the labor market in Greece, for example, the agricultural sector. This clause, of course, was very, very tricky anyway, in the sense that it entails some kind of, labor market. Let's say that people were kind of trafficked sometimes, because people were actually dependent upon their employer to have a residence permit. But at the same time, it was something that could be, better made than abolished totally. So these are some legislative changes that happened in the past 2 years that showcase that Greece has been moving towards the deprivation, let's say, of legal documents for many, many categories of the incoming population. At the same time, there are several challenges remaining as regards the access to the asylum system. So this is an infographic that comes from a recent report from Mobile Info team, where our team also gave input. Of course, all these reports and data are available. If you want me to send them over, I would be happy to. In Greece, the access to the asylum system is also a very big challenge, because you don't get into a police station and you say, I want to apply for asylum, essentially. So you have to go to the asylum service. The asylum service is not accessible, especially now with the COVID situation, even less. So there is a system of Skype in theory. People have to call, on a specific line of Skype to get an appointment. As you see in the infographic, there are people waiting for even 14 months to get an appointment in Skype. This essentially leaves a very big, very big number of the incoming population without any access to the asylum systems, thus undocumented, thus prone to be apprehended and detained administratively. Just trying to sum up very quickly, an augmenting number of third country nationals being undocumented, which means a bigger and bigger population being at risk of being administratively detained for a prolonged period, but at the same time also in a big risk of being irregularly detained and illegally pushed back to Turkey. Because this is another thing that's very that's very important about the Greek context, the generalization of the pushback operations. And here you can see some snapshots of some investigative reporting that we are doing with forensic architecture, trying to prove that kind of modus operandi by the Greek authorities, of people being pushed back to Turkey without having any kind of access to the asylum system, detained in informal, not detention facilities, in warehouses. I think these are, if I can comment on the project, I think these are, the par excellence black holes, is what we would call black holes, people that being brought to warehouses, illegally detained, and then pushed back to Turkey. So the situation right now is a situation where not only a lot of undocumented migrants are prone to apprehension and administrative detention, but also to other more important violations of human rights, such as illegal detention, abduction, and being pushed back to Turkey. These are the latest official data on administrative detention that I try to find in order to show you. The one These are, of course, the official pre-removal detention centers. Okay, this does not include the people that are being detained in police stations, which are a lot and are not documented or accounted for. And these are, of course, not include, these numbers do not include also people that are being detained in informal settings like warehouses, etc. So these are the latest official numbers only on pre-removal centers. The one table shows the number of detainees per pre-removal center, and the other table shows the number of detainees that stay in detention in this period, the same period, for more than 6 months. So you see that there is also a modus operandi, let's say, of detention, of administrative detention going for more than 6 months, which is quite alarming, sometimes even more than 18 months. So it's, but in general, the past few years, we have managed to lower the time of administrative detention. Now we have seen it being rise again more and more. And this is a map just to showcase a bit the geography. So with the blue dots, it is either pre-removal centers or in the islands, of course, the reception and identification facilities that are also detention facilities. And also some main red dots are the main police stations that we know that people are also being detained. And of course, again, I repeat, there are people detained scattered across the Greek territory in police stations without being accounted for in any kind of official statistics. So what we say, as Judith also said, and I guess as all NGOs and human rights organizations say, is that detention has to be proportionate. It's not in Greece, and it has to come, I mean, also with a specific goal of people being returned. This modus operandi of generalization of administrative detention in Greece comes hand in hand with the fact that returns are lower than they used to be. So it doesn't make any sense, actually, because we understand, of course, that people, there are some people that are eligible for being returned back to their countries of origin. But if people cannot be returned back to their countries of origin, then it doesn't make any sense of a state keeping them for 6, 8, 18 months in a detention facility. And in general, this is a trend that happens across Europe. I mean, the number, the 18% of people of third country nationals being returned to their countries of origin, as opposed to 29 in 2019. There is a number from the European Commission that regard the whole European Union. So in general, the European Union, there is a drop in the return rates. At the same time, there is a rise in the detention, in the detention phenomenon. And of course, we have these new proposed provisions in the pact that would only shift more the burden towards detention as deterrent. So just a few final words, because I'm quite aware of time, on what we do as Human Rights 360. We also ran a project for alternatives to detention in the community of undocumented migrants. All the things, I mean, I discussed above our findings of the work we are doing. What we have been seeing is that people that are left undocumented for a very big period of time, but I mean, we have increased people that are actually speaking Greek fluently and are undocumented for years. So this is the extent to which this doesn't make sense at all. And at the same time, they become more and more vulnerable. We published few stories. One is on this slide that I show you. We try also to showcase the impact that this has to the community. So people that are being left without any kind of health provision, people that now with the COVID-19 have a very big issue of access to the vaccination, for example, because they're undocumented, trapped in this kind of black hole, in this kind of perpetual vicious circle of detention, people that have been detained again and again not just one time. I mean, people have been detained and then left from the detention facility because return is not possible, and then detained again. And we have been seeing this vicious circle of detention in Greece happening for months and months on. This is, and what we say again is that alternatives to detention should be the rule. The alternatives to detention should be the rule, and detention should be the exception. And in any case, it should be individualized. There should be an individualized assessment. And in any case, unaccompanied minors or minors and families in any case should not be detained, because it can never be in the best interest of a child to be detained in any way. So I'm sorry I tried to go through everything very quickly. So I know I touched upon a lot of thematics. I'm at your disposal for any comments or questions or anything. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very interesting because I think for everybody it was interesting, because so far we listened so much about, we heard so much about Greece and what was going on through the news, but we never, I think having this in-depth kind of presentation was very important for us, and to know more about the situation. And let's move on to Daniel Arencibia. The floor is yours. He will talk about specifically the Canary Islands and the situation of the migrants have to face in the Canary Islands, which usually live in a very precarious condition with detention centers, again, deportation pushbacks and human rights violation of any kind. So the floor is yours, Daniel. You have to turn on your microphone, Daniel, okay? Perfect.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. The situation in the Canary Islands changed completely because of the pandemic. Starting in 2020, there was a change in the ways to arrive Europe for migrants, and there was a multiplication by 10 of people coming to the Canary Islands. During the 10 previous years, we have received 2,000 people by year in small boats. And suddenly in 2020, we received 23,000 people. So it multiplied by 11, the number of the previous year. What were the consequences? Okay, the first consequence was that the official migration detention center were closed. The policemen were claiming that it was a focus for infections, and people there, so many people there were easily infected. So it was closed. And they had the brilliant idea that, so let's receive people in a pier where they arrive with a small boat, Il Porto, in the dock itself. And it was a good idea for the 5 first days. They were received there by the Red Cross. They received first medical attention. But what happened? That many other were coming later. And we achieved a number of 2,600 people sleeping on the floor without a bed, without a roof, without a toilet, without without a visit to the lawyers, without elementary sanitary measures. For instance, we had said that a detention center, a building being a detention center, was not appropriated because of the COVID, because of the pandemic. Okay, we had 2,600 people sleeping shoulder by shoulder, so absolutely together in a very small space. And part of that, we had a curious simulation that they were not detained. It was obvious that they were detained there, but during weeks, the police simply didn't recognize that they were detained. And later, after the first resolution from the courts, they started adding a sentence in this devolution notice saying, you are formally free. You are formally free, but you cannot leave this place. So, and we didn't have the resources that we had in the real detention center. So we have, in fact, a detention center, a much worse detention center, sleeping on the floor with rats and without floor and without toilet, without warm food, without lawyers, but they formally were not detained. We had people there for even 4 weeks. Visits from NGOs were absolutely forbidden. Only Human Rights Watch had the opportunity to visit that center. We thank very much Human Rights Watch because here in Spain, no other was allowed to visit that place. And our main concern is that the courts recently, last week, has said that that situation was correct. So they say that because of the lack of resources and the emergency situation, that situation was correct. And because they really had a problem. They had the problem that according to the criminal code in Spain, to extend a detention further than 72 hours without a court resolution is a crime. So we really had a scenario here in Spain during many months where a crime was committed by 300 policemen and it was visited by ministers and European commissioners. So the sole way they had was to deny. And it was denied by the first court, and the issue was simplified by the Superior Court, saying that was appropriate. So the situation is critical for us because we would have had there a solution saying we made a mistake. We didn't understand the law, for instance. It could have been a solution. The policemen didn't know that they couldn't extend the detention further than 72 hours without the permission of a judge. It could have been a solution, but the real solution has been that was correct. So what the European Human Rights Court says that is a violation of dignity and of freedom, according to the Spanish court, now has been qualified as a correct measure. And we cannot accept that. Obviously, we cannot accept that. Later in the Q&A, if you want, I may share some videos because I think that a video of the place explain clearly what we are speaking about. We had children there living for 9 nights, and people sleeping simply on the floor in a humid port that we call here in Porto de la Vergoña, the shame port. But the last step has been very concerning for us, that is a court saying that it was correct. The second step, I had said the official detention centers were closed because of the COVID, because of the pandemic. And they created some camps that fortunately are open camps. But on the other side, they had created for some months something that is not permitted by law, by Spanish law, that is to give the island the status of detention center. Because they simply rejected people trying to take a plane from the airport. Simply that, without no paper, without no explanation, you simply cannot take a plane. Because the policy, we suppose, was it will be easier to deport these guys from an island than to permit them to spread by Europe, by Spain, and who knows where, when we will want, when Morocco will reopen their frontiers. The situation is, at the end, is that Morocco has the airports closed. So what do we do meanwhile? Because if we cannot deport these people, the Spanish law, the Spanish regulation doesn't offer a solution to that scenario. You cannot detain here more than for 60 days. So this is why the detention, the formal detention center were simply closed. And they have created parallel or alternative solutions, didn't breaching the law, because the island can, in Spain, if you may move by an island, you may move by the entire Spain. And they created temporarily the island as jail, and they create the places like the Porto de la Vergoña without respect to any kind of law. Now they have reopened the detention centers, and visit from NGOs remain forbidden, because the official reason is that it increased the risk of infection, and we are also watching here a new institution that we didn't know in the past. It was ruled by law, it was not ruled by law, it was mentioned by law, but with no legal real status. That is the temporary Center for Temporary Attention Center. So Center for Temporary Attention of Foreigners. And where no one can be detained more than 72 hours, but obviously they are detained there many more days. And the real concern here is that we are in a, perfectly speaking, of black holes, where no NGO is permitted to go in. The lawyers are recommended not to visit. It was terrible here. That was terrible here. We had 10,000 people in the Porto de la Vergoña who left the system, left were released or were deported, who knows, without an interview with the lawyers. And so during that period, when someone went to the police station to claim for international protection, the police didn't simply said, no, it's temporarily suspended. No, there is no international protection in this period, or things like that. We had ACNUR here making a good effort to reopen the protection system, but what really had happened was that the local resources we had in the Canary Islands were not prepared to attend 23,000 people, because there were no policemen for the international protection interviews for so many. So it was simply everything blocked during that time. Presently, in the actual time, they arrived from Spain at the same. Yesterday we had 18 people dying 1 kilometer away from the coast. Around 3,000 people have died last year sailing to the Canary Islands. But I understand that this webinar is not for those who die, but for those who arrive. And we have but they are because in Spain it's a responsibility of the regions, and the Canary Island region has places for 300 minors, and they have now 3,000. So we have the children roaming by the streets, with no adults taking care of them. And the situation, that situation again is critical. Anyway, about the detention, I think it's interesting if you give me a minute simply to share the video of the place we were speaking about in Porto de la Vergoña. And I'm open for Q&A, but testing is better than myself. Okay. So we share in this one. We see a rat. It was a deck, a pier, and in this second one, we see a view of where you will see no bedroom, no bed at all. And this was the deck where they were detained during the worst time of the pandemic. People simply crowded. There was a crowd there. The people with COVID were supposed to be separated in these camps, but well, according to the authorities, these people here are separated 1.5 meters between them, and they are not detained. This is what is critical for us. I mean, what is critical for us is that there is a position from the Spanish authorities to deny what is happening. If you deny what is happening, you cannot solve it. And they are simply saying that this is not happening, and full stop. And the court respect and protect that position from the authorities. So thank you so much for that time, and I'm open for a Q&A later.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was very interesting. And also those images were very terrifying because the conditions are really, really, really terrible, honestly. And also seeing that rat makes you understand the condition which migrants have to face, especially undocumented migrants that have no rights and are systematically detained. And yes, so basically we are at the end of this webinar, but I want you, all the participants, to actually participate and ask more questions. If you have any question or any reflection that you want to make, I said in the chat that you can raise your hand through the reactions, and you can ask your question by also turning on your camera or a microphone if you feel comfortable in doing that, and ask directly your own question. And I must say that, personally speaking, that I can find so many similarities between what you, Judith, Eleni, and Daniel said about the condition that migrants have to face even in Italy, because we analyzed this through the site that we launched in the report that we actually produced. And thank to Gennaro Santoro and Federica Borlizzi for writing it. And we, of course, we notice even here in Italy that there is the deprivation of liberty has become something really systematic of undocumented migrants. We have the absence of the attention towards the assessment of the suitability of migrants that get admitted into these detention centers. We have so many migrants that actually have to face many, they are really vulnerable, even people who are maybe have some problems concerning drugs. They are addicted to drugs and that are admitted to the detention centers where they shouldn't be admitted there. We have people who are not eligible to be detained, but still they are detained within our detention centers. So we have so many similarities, I think, across Europe. And one of the most terrifying things is that, again, we have the detention of minors, of children. And So this was a very interesting and insightful presentation. So thank you all. And here we see Andrea Menapace that wants to ask a question. The floor is your microphone, Andrea. Okay.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, maybe I can ask a question, which is more like a general question. And I know that Eleni needs to leave, so feel free to leave whenever you need. But very quickly, it seems to me that if we want to put together a strategy at national level or either European level to change this system, we need to look for allies. It's not only the job of NGOs, grassroots or international, whatever they are. I think we need allies. And it's very, and I cannot understand why, for example, I don't see in Italy lawyers saying anything about what is happening as a professional body. And I don't see also doctors. And I see lawyers and doctors should be concerned in terms of their code of conduct, not only for the doctors and lawyers who are protecting the system, but for those who are not able to do their job. So are you aware of any initiative, or do you think this could be a right strategy to get to talk to the bar association in the different countries and also try to engage with the professional bodies of doctors? Because we know that there are NGOs like Physicians for Human Rights that have been doing this for ages, but I'm talking about not necessarily lawyers and doctors interested in human rights, but just for the sake of protecting the ethics of their own profession. They should say something about the lack of access to a lawyer, for example, because now it's happening in detention centers, but why they keep silent? That's there's a question that is with me every time we are trying to think about a different strategy.
I think it's a critical point. The level of the quality of the legal services received by these people. What happened? I'm a lawyer. I don't work. I don't work for money. I work always pro bono in this, but I see my colleagues working in this, and for that are very underpaid for these services. So what do they say? What do they say is that if I attend a Spanish guy in a turno de oficio, we call it a lawyer for free. If we attend a lawyer for free, the state pays us 200 euros per case, for instance. And if we attend these guys, they pay us 100 euro per attending 10 people at the same time. So this situation takes that you cannot dedicate 200 hours for 10 people to understand their human case, their history, if they are eligible or not for international protection, if they have been properly attended by the policemen. You cannot attend that. You don't have a correct translator for the real language of these guys. So and you as lawyer are going to receive 100 euros for an entire day there, and you will try to solve it because you will be fighting for the translator. So at the end of the day, either you are a very vocational lawyer and you know a lot of languages, or it's almost impossible to do a proper deployment of your work there. And I understand them because they say, I have done the best. I knew the best I could, but it was, I requested for an individual interview with my client, and the police denied. Simply said, you cannot have an individual interview. It's not permitted by the situation. So what can they do? They can say, okay, I don't give the legal service, and you will have to look at another lawyer. But at the end, we had here a pronunciation, a resolution by the bar institution of lawyers, say corporate of lawyers, saying that there was a minimum that had to be given in the legal assistance. That without that minimum, the lawyer had to say, "I don't give the assistance here." They are. I think that the real key here is that they are absolutely underpaid, and they receive the same money if they give international protection or not. They receive the same money if they take to court the devolution resolution or they don't take it to court. At the end, we are on a white paper to a formal paper saying here there has been legal advice when it hasn't existed.
Okay, since Eleni just asked me to say something before she goes.
Yeah,
okay.
Just before I go, and I'm sorry if I'm sorry, Judith, for going first. I just really need to run, and I just wanted to comment on what Andrea said and what I think is very linked to what Monica sent now on the chat. So I just wanted to say that I totally agree. This is not something that only NGOs have to deal with, and I think it's very linked to the toxicity of the public discourse when it comes to migration and refugee issue. I remember that back in 2015 and 16, where people with things were a bit more welcoming. For example, the CCBE, which is the Council of Bars and Law Societies, I think, of Europe, something like that. So let's say that the European Coalition of bars of lawyers. Back then, they used to deal and run projects for refugee and migrant issues. Right now, everybody has become silent. Doctors also have to step up, unions, and not only these two, I mean, also labor unions. Where are they? I mean, where are the labor unions in this discussion? Most of the people in Greece that are being left undocumented are people that are being trafficked through labor market, working for what we call the black market in Greece. Also municipalities, they have the problem in their hands. And at the end of the day, the big municipalities in Greece, even those that are not, pro-migrant, are the people that we have to deal with this issue. The church also, I mean, where are they? I mean, I'm saying that because I think there is a more than ever pressing need for bigger alliances. And I think that we also have to find a narrative that's more convincing than the one we already use, in the sense that we should talk about not only about detention being inhumane, but also about detention being ineffective. To bring the numbers back in the discussion and to say that, okay, I mean, we get it, guys, if people are to be returned, of course, but until they are returned, when they are returned, it doesn't make any sense, I mean, for people, for the system to pay all these huge amounts of money, and at the end of the day, only big contractors, because there are people that gain out of this situation financially, and there are big contractors in the kind of detention facilities. So trying to wrap it up, I think that I totally agree with you guys, and there is a more than ever also need for a European coalition in this regard. So having on that note, I'm really sorry I have to leave, but I would really love to have this discussion going, a step further. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eleni. Thank you so much. We will keep in touch soon. No worries.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Good luck with the storm.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Bye. Thank you. Judith?
Yeah, I just wanted to add very quickly, of course, I agree with everything Daniela and Eleni have said. Just to flag that sometimes that I think we all need to be better at trying to build alliances with, I guess, unsuspecting allies, which sometimes is, sorry about that. Sometimes it is possible, and I'll just mention two examples with respect to children being detained in these jail cells in Greece. There were a lot of police officers who were very much against that practice. They really didn't like having these kids in their jail cells. They felt bad about it. They didn't know how to take care of them properly, and they were aware of that. And so they actually, there were some who came out and spoke out against the practice, and that, you know, that can really help. And I did find something similar in Spain, though it didn't. They weren't as outspoken, but there are, you know, very sort of left-wing police unions that they can raise their voice on a number of issues. I mean, Daniela, I'm sure, has lots of opinions about this. Maybe that they could do a lot more, or they are ineffective, but I personally find that it can be persuasive to people who might otherwise, you know, not be thinking about these issues, or not be concerned about them, to hear from somebody like a police officer saying, look, you know, I have to take care of these people in this awful port facility, and they've just arrived by boat, and I have to put them in these containers where there's no air, and sometimes there's sewers, water flowing, and, you know, it's really hot, and they're kids. And to have somebody like that pointing out how bad it is, and how it's not their job, that's not what they signed up to do when they became a police officer, you know. So I think we have to be better. Obviously there won't always be that kind of ally, but we should be more open to looking for them.
Yeah, totally agree with your observation. And again,
thank you. That's great.
Yeah, thank you so much. What Eleni was trying to say before is, because she probably read a comment here by Monica Gagliani, that she said that unfortunately young people are not aware of what is going on, or what are CPR, I mean the CPR in Italian, but the Detention Center for Migrants are. And maybe we need also more awareness, because people, even I noticed in Italy, people don't really literally know what these detention centers are. So I believe that there should be even more awareness coming from the civil society, so that we can all work together to overcome this kind of system, because the more there is awareness, the better, of course. And I think that is very, very crucial. And I don't know if there are any other questions that you want to ask, or maybe you have some observation or some reflections. Somebody raised their hand, I think. Arianna Di Benedetto, you can turn on your camera and microphone if you want, or you can write it down, whatever. Okay, perfect.
Hi. Thank you for the time. I will be very quick because I have an English class with a 9-year-old in like 8 minutes. But my question, I'm all very new to this, so I read the report that you wrote. I'm with Amnesty. I've been recently with Amnesty, so we were trying to figure out, you know, how to move with the CPR with Amnesty in Turin, and I sort of wanted to understand, like, if there is a shared goal of completely shutting down this detention centers, or whether the approach needs to be more gradual, and to get them to respect human rights first, and then to slowly move to a different solution, just to understand if there is like a shared goal on this. I don't know if I was clear. Thank you.
Who wants to reply, Judith or Daniel first?
Well, I think that's more a question for Child, isn't it? I mean, I can say for Human Rights Watch, I mean, the political situation in every context will be different. So the strategy to pursue in any given country, you know, it has to be country specific, and you know, you work in coalitions and all of that. So it's hard to give like a you know, a very concrete answer. I mean, Human Rights Watch believes that immigration detention should be abolished. We understand that in many cases that's going to be a gradual process, but you know, in some very dire situations, people should be released immediately. That's But I'm
very concerned, Judith, also with the proposals around Europe to close detention centers in Europe, but to open them in North Africa, to externalize to third countries the subject. If the proposal to close detention centers here is in that way, I prefer to have them here open and working than externalizing them to Libya, for instance. What I understand is that even if we have detention centers, what in any case we have to guarantee is that the law applies there inside. That the international protection is respected, the dignity is respected, terms are respected. No people die here without a research of what has happened, and we may have centers here not being black holes, and I prefer to have them here than having them delegating that task to a country without resources.
Thank you very much for answering. I'm sorry if it was a difficult question. I just wanted to understand whether there was like a general sort of agreement on this. So thank you very much. I will have to go, but it was all very interesting.
Thank you so much for your question. We have 4 minutes left. I don't think that, does anybody raise their hand and want to ask one question? We have 4 minutes. We are about to wrap it up, I would say. And thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for your presentations, Judith, Daniel, and Eleni, of course, that she's not here anymore. And you can, I also posted on the chat the link to our official website, which is Black Holes, entirely dedicated to the so-called Centri di Permanenza per il Rimpatrio, so Detention Center for Migrants in Italy. And I will post it once again in the chat so for everybody who came kind of later can look at it. And thank you again for your participation. It was very important listening to these presentations and yeah. Oh, sorry. You have a question?
Sorry, this is Carlo. Do you mind also to send via email, if it's possible, the link, because I have not the option to see the chat because I'm driving now.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Thank you.
I think I have your email. Yes. Okay. Okay. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thanks.
Okay.
We'll see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for the invitation.